everyone, and welcome to another instalment of our In Conversation With series. Today I'm joined with James Lawless, who is a TD for Kildare North. Hello James, how are you?
Hi Quiva, hi everybody.
So I suppose, James, if you just want to get right on into it. So the very first question I have for you is your earliest political memory.
Okay, my earliest political memory, I'm not sure if it's political or historical. My granddad was a big, I suppose he was a big Fianna Fáil man, but he was also very interested in history, kind of national history, local history. I grew up in County Wexford, even though I represent North Kildare. I actually grew up in Wexford, down by the sea, down near River Chapel. And my granddad would have been, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents as a child, and he was always telling me about I think probably the earliest political memory, he was always telling me what the yellow press, as he called it, did to Parnell. So basically the British kind of red top tabloids, and how they kind of destroyed Parnell after his affair. And, you know, there was the whole Irish patriot done down, you know, by the evil empire. So kind of at the fireside in his house, kind of hearing about Parnell, Wolfe Tone, Pearse, you know, De Valera, right up through. And my granny actually as well would have talked about, my granny grew up in Dunmore East, and she would have talked about when Dev came to town, like back in the day, back in the 30s and 40s maybe, people would sort of be crowding around, you know, like it was like God was coming to town. And if you couldn't get close to him, if you got close to someone else that got close to him, like if you touched the man that touched the coat of the person in front of De Valera, it was like kind of, you were kind of golden as well. So I remember I was kind of brought up on a lot of those stories. Another kind of maybe more political memory I have is the 1990 presidential election, when Brian Lanahan Sr., who was the Fianna Fáil candidate in the race, obviously when it was a difficult election, and you know it got very heated towards the end. And I remember Mary Robinson won. Now there were some good things about her winning. First female president, and you know she was quite progressive in many ways. She left the job early to go up to the United Nations, which is maybe a pity. She did 6 years instead of the 7, which maybe gave it a little bit of disservice. But on the ground, did a lot of good things. But Brian Lanahan Sr. lost the election, and I remember our school principal, I was in, I think, first year, second school at the time. The school principal came in and said, we're going to have a day of celebration for the election of a new president. And I piped up from the back of the class, a day of mourning. And I remember he was giving out to me saying, that's a cheek, and I've got a new president. And I said, but you didn't get the most votes. Our man got the most votes. Why isn't he president? Because he'd actually topped the poll in the first preference count. And I remember many years later, actually way back at the end of secondary school, that same principal called me aside after mock interviews and said, you know, I'm a Fianna Fáil man myself, so fair play to you. But I couldn't say it. So there are a couple of early political memories.
And I suppose in college then you studied maths and then later law. During your college time, did you ever think that you would eventually go into politics?
Yeah, I thought I might. I was always interested in politics. I would have been interested in politics. I was involved in students. So I went to Trinity. I was involved in Students' Union politics there. I was involved in quite a few societies there. I was in the maths, physics, and computer science. So I was involved in MathSoc, but I was also involved in the Literary Society, some of the historical groups, other groups and societies, and I would have been involved in the Students' Union Publications Committee, which ran some college papers. Actually, later on, I ran the Fianna Fáil paper, Cúisle magazine, which isn't being published at the moment, but was great for a couple of years. I was editor of that for a couple of years. So I always kind of had an interest in publications and communication. And one thing I did in college days as well, I actually went to not just the Fianna Fáil meetings, but I would have dropped into public meetings, say, on campus, because there was a good speaker coming in. A lot of international speakers used to come in. Sometimes the parties on the left and even on the hard left had quite interesting programs and quite interesting events. But I remember, I think there was a conference on Marxism in world cinema, and I think it was the Social Workers Party at the time, People for Profit Now, had this whole weekend of analysis of cinema and how cinema propagates certain inequality and certain themes. And I was like, this is really interesting, guys, but how are you going to actually fix it? And they're like, oh, we're going to watch more cinema. I was like, all right, okay. Meanwhile, the guys in Students' Union and the Fianna Fáil guys that I was getting to know were actually, you know, lobbying to get fees reduced or abolished, to get student grants, to get accommodation on campus. So I kind of said, well, the Fianna Fáil guys seem to be the doers. They have their values and have their interests, but some of the groups are kind of great talkers, but actually the guys that seem to be actually getting their hands dirty and getting the job done were primarily the Fianna Fáil guys. So I joined the Fianna Fáil Common on campus then as well. I would have been leaning towards it from my earlier kind of family background and political education. But yeah, so it wasn't. Yeah, I mean, I didn't know if I'd actually ever run for office, but I certainly was getting involved.
Yeah.
And it was a great debate. So I remember we reenacted the treaty debate, the Fianna Fáil coming, the Ulster coming versus the Fine Gael branch on campus. We did the treaty debate, reran, etc., and couple of good events like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you've always had an interest in politics, whether or not you're actually going to pursue it.
Yeah, and then when I studied law later on, I went to King's Inns and did law later, and so part of the reason I did that is because I think if you're interested in politics and you're in law, they kind of go hand in hand, because how the world works and how the country is set up and how the constitution is structured, and how things kind of fall into place, and who has power over who, and what's the separation of powers, and what are the checks and balances. In a lot of ways, law and politics are complementary. So yeah, no, it was definitely something I always had an interest in, and I suppose I wanted to kind of get stuck in as well. By becoming involved in politics, I could bring about change, or I could work on the issues that affected me and my community and the rest of it. So yeah, and it was something that that I always kind of look towards doing, and would encourage anybody that wants to affect change their communities, our workplaces, or your campuses, or wherever they may be. It's a great way to do it. Get involved, have your voice heard, and make it happen.
And just on the note of people getting involved in politics, what advice would you give someone who's maybe thinking about starting a career in politics?
Okay. Yeah, that's an awkward one in a way, because starting a career in politics can be difficult. I mean, there's an downside to it as well. I don't mean to put anybody off, because I think it's something really everybody should do and look at doing. But I know I've spoken to some young councillors recently, people that got involved maybe in the local elections, gone by and got elected, and I was really delighted, and I really want to see young people coming through. I think it's so important that we have people at every level of the organisation, and each generation is getting involved and being represented and bringing their own voice to bear and bringing their own issues and challenges to the table. But I suppose I nearly to get another career going first or in parallel, because politics is very fickle, and you can spend an awful lot of time trying to kind of get involved and get elected and working your way up. And I suppose there's bread and butter issues as well. So get your degree first, get your qualification, get started out, get your first job. I suppose maybe as a young person coming through, maybe prioritize that to an extent, because that will give you that little bit of security if you can achieve that. And I suppose then you can explore politics in parallel, but don't sacrifice one for the other, because you can be a great activist and spend years, but don't neglect your education, etc. as well. And one will help the other, because the more education you can pursue and the more you read, the more you encounter, the more opinions you're exposed to, the better politician you will be long term, because you'll have that makeup. But get involved, I suppose, in terms of how would somebody do it, how would somebody getting involved in politics. If it's local politics, and all politics is local ultimately, get involved in local societies, get involved in local groups, go to public meetings. There's local causes that you'll be aware of. Often people bring forward an issue that they've experienced, and it turns out that they weren't the only one, that actually loads of people had the same concerns. I mean, in my case, I live in Sandons in North Kildare, and I kind of got involved in local politics because the train service here was so poor at the time. Going back 15, 16 years ago, I was commuting out to Dublin, still am, but I just started commuting at the time, and the trains weren't on time, there's no seats, all those kind of issues. Timetable wasn't great, the stops on offer weren't great. So I kind of set up a campaign group with a few other disgruntled commuters, and we got the ball rolling. And I would say the train service now is way, way, way better than it was before. There's still issues, but the issues of success in a way, because more people are on the trains, and we've got a much better timetable, much better service. There's still work to be done, but that was just, in my case, that was an issue affecting me. Other people might say, it's the bus, or it's getting into college, or if it's involved in campus, maybe the courses that are on offer don't work, the timetable doesn't work. It could be in an employment context. Maybe the rights they feel aren't being vindicated, they're not getting proper breaks, they're not getting proper exposure, proper training. Whatever it is, each person is different. But get involved in those issues. Make your voice heard. Your voice is just as good or just as important as anyone else's. And often you'll find when you start to speak up that other people would say, do you know what, that affects me too. Let's do this together. So get involved, get to know people, and you'd be amazed what comes back around. You could be involved in a campaign, and 10 years later, you could be an elected officer, you could be, an activist in the area, and you meet the same people again. And actually, it often turns out the same people that get involved in one group are the same people that get involved in lots of groups, because they're the doers in society. So be one of those people, and get it done, or try to get it done, and you'll certainly learn a lot along the way, if nothing else.
I suppose continuing on from that, what do you enjoy most about being a public representative?
Yeah, so I suppose it's very varied. It's very varied. You can be doing, in one day, you can be the very local, and you can be doing the very big picture, and you could be, in the one day. I think it was, I remember, I think I brought in some social media legislation a couple of years ago. One of my first acts in the law to try to regulate social media would have been dealing with the big firms like the Facebooks and the Twitters, and like I met Mark Zuckerberg at the time, and I met his equivalent in some of the other companies as well. And it was a lot of international attention, and it was talking papers like the New York Times and the UK Guardian and that. I remember being in some meeting, things with the Canadian group, tech group, and I had to rush out of that meeting because there was a problem with the bush shelter in the constituency, and that was my next meeting I was going to. So you're kind of going from the kind of global to the kind of local in the same 60 minutes. And part of that is what makes the job interesting. That you're dealing with local issues, you're dealing with big picture issues. You could be running from those, you could have those two meetings or those two calls and go straight into a dull vote on a housing issue or an environmental issue. You could be going to a public meeting in the constituency the night, and then you might have a conference call the next morning with colleagues abroad. So it always changes. And if you can bring an idea to the table and get people to buy into it and get people to support it or improve it by sharing their ideas, and if you can bring that to a place where that becomes to be accepted, then that's a great achievement. And you made something happen. And even if you walk away at that stage, or if it's got to that point, that comes along afterwards, that foundation work is done. So I suppose there's a sense of achievement when you get wins like that.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose in terms of your own career, you've been a public representative for a number of years now. Is there any standout moment that you would consider the highlight of your career so far?
Yeah, there's a couple of things I suppose that I'm quite proud of. When I was elected mayor of Naas, actually, it was a huge honour for me, and I really enjoyed my time as mayor. Obviously, I'm a TD now, and I suppose in the hierarchy, a TD is probably more senior. I suppose has more national responsibilities than a local representative. But I have to say that when I was mayor, I really found I visited as many groups as I could around the town and around the district of Naas, and not necessarily you as an individual, but the office. By going to visit the local men's shed, a school, an old folks home, a GA pitch that's competing in a competition, a GA team. You were kind of bringing the chain of the office to it, and it was actually amazing how people responded to that. People were like, "No, thank you so much for coming to our event." Like, of course, no problem. But you sort of you almost made their day. And so it's not about you as the individual; you represented the office. But it was a great honour, and I suppose I also learned in that term how many fantastic, pretty much mostly voluntary groups are out there working with people, working with communities, working with all sectors, doing really, really amazing work that often isn't recognised. So having the opportunity to support those groups, by your presence, by your support, by your actions, was something I really enjoyed. I suppose on the bigger, the national stage, I was mentioning a minute ago that getting legislation passed in the last Dáil. As an opposition TD, I still managed to pass a number of amendments and bills. And I remember the first time I put something down to a vote, and it was the whole Dáil chamber voting on it, all parties. And I thought it was something I'd put together, put it to the floor, and it was voted on. And there's kind of a big screen. It's like watching a match. There's a big screen in the corner of the Dáil where the votes come up, because everybody presses the buttons electronically. So you see the green, red, and blue. Blue is staying for abstain, and obviously the green is Tá, the red is Neil. So I remember the first time I put it was my piece of legislation. So you're voting in there every day for different pieces of legislation, different amendments. But this is the first one that's something I had put together. It was actually before the Dáil. And I remember watching the buttons on the screen, and there's a kind of delay because there's a couple of minutes where people make up their minds and they're given a window they can vote. And it was almost like watching a match, the counter ticking down to the minute when it froze. And it was kind of hovering in the edge. And all of a sudden the Tás went ahead. And I think by a margin of 4 votes, my bill passed, passed through the Dáil. I was like, wow, I'm actually against the government. So I've just introduced a piece of legislation which is passed, and actually we've beaten the government on it. So that was great. And I suppose that was kind of great feeling of satisfaction, saying, you can actually do things now. You can actually bring ideas to the chamber. You can win votes, and you can make change. And forevermore, that's on the statute books.
Mm-hmm.
So those kind of wins, certainly that's there's a kick out of that, and there's a sense of a job well done. And there are a couple of standout moments, I think, in the last couple of years.
And you touched on there the kind of busy life that a public representative has. How do you feel life as a public rep has affected your social life?
It's in positive ways and negative ways. Okay, positive ways. I know so many people up and down the country. like locally in North Kildare, but also right across the country. Like pretty much any part of the country I could go to now and pick up the phone and meet somebody for a coffee or a pint or lunch or whatever. And you know, I know them through the party or through politics. And I do that often if I am, you know, if I am in some part of the country for a meeting or something else. I usually will contact the local councillor or the local rep, or you know, the LAR or whoever's on the ground, and you know, and generally with our friends up and down the country, which is great. I suppose the downside of that is that that's almost becomes your life, so that you know you don't necessarily have a social life separate to politics. So most of my friends now would be people that I kind of know through politics or in politics with, and then I suppose there is a thing where if you're out socializing locally, if you go for dinner or go for a drink, that it can be very hard to get kind of quiet time, because generally people are meaning well, but people might come up to you with their questions and issues and concerns. That's part of the job, but it can mean that it's hard to get, you know, time out. You know, if and I suppose it depends. I mean, in a way, in almost every way, that's a good thing, because people want to talk to you and want to share their thoughts and concerns with you. But sometimes you say, "Come back to me in the morning," you know, or give me a chat on Monday, and we'll have a chat about it more thoroughly. But that's Irish politics. There's great kind of connections between the public reps and the people you represent, and in almost every way that's a good thing. But it's hard to have a private life, I suppose, when you're in the spotlight all the time.
So, and when you do have that time, that downtime to yourself, what do you like to do in your spare time?
Yeah, so I actually I do a lot of running. So that's kind of my outlet. I do park runs pretty much every Saturday. I would take part in a lot of kind of local 5 and 10K races, and I have to say I really enjoyed it since the lockdown. I mean, obviously, look, it's catastrophic in many ways, and for businesses, and you know, for the people that have unfortunately passed away. And there's been some really, you know, I mean, it's just beyond parallel in terms of how awful it has been for so many people. But the one sort of silver lining, I think, has been the fact that, and even when the 2K rule was in place, I just found that people were talking to their neighbours. People were out running, walking, instead of driving to a park, instead of going to somewhere, you know, a bit further away. People were actually exploring their immediate environments, getting talking to the neighbours at the gate, you know, talking to people on the road. I saw people out, like families out with children picking blackberries on the side of the road. People walking, talking. So I thought the community kind of came alive in that regard. So certainly, yes. So one thing I do to relax is to run, and I know some people listen to music. I don't. I just leave the phone at home, leave the music at home, leave the earphones at home. Just get out there, watch nature go by, and just kind of get my head together. I've actually recently, or semi-recently, taken a bit of gardening as well. I'm trying to grow vegetables during the lockdown and planted some potatoes, and actually we got some chickens as well. So I've been sort of semi-farming, which is not something that I've done before, but trying to kind of I suppose embrace some of that during lockdown. But yeah, but certainly in normal times, yeah, go for a run. I'd read a lot as well. Have a Kindle, which I'd use quite a bit. I read political books. I read books like *Sapiens*, *Guns, Germs, and Steel*, which kind of traces civilization and how, you know, the modern world is as it is. But also for a bit of escapism, like John Connolly, the kind of supernatural horror thrillers that he writes. One of those on the Kindle, ready to go. So yeah, so look, a bit of a mixed bag, but that's how I try to take downtime.
Of course, it's very important, especially with your life being so busy as a public rep. And I suppose
that's it. Yeah.
Have is canvassing. And is there any standout moment that you have that you would consider your funniest canvassing story? I know across all elections we all have our own, but I'm just wondering what yours is.
Yeah, I was thinking about this actually. It's hard. It's hard to think of one of the best kind of the standout moment. There's been so many moments. One thing when you're, I suppose, anyone's canvassing regularly, you get to know an area, you know, and it's when you get to know each house and you get to know what to expect nearly behind each door, if you know it very well, and you know, you even know the doorbell's broken in the house, so you go on the side and do those kind of things. I think canvassing is really, really important, and it's something that I've always done outside of election time, because it's not really just about winning the vote. It's also about getting to know people's thoughts, fears, dreams, hopes, and it's the best focus group you can ever have, because they talk about polling, and polling is useful, focus groups and all that. But if you go to 100 doors, like if there's an issue of the day, you know, whatever the big issue being debated in the Dáil is, or in the media, around all the Sunday talk programs, if you as a politician want to know what the people think in your constituency, go knock on 100 doors. And if you really want to know what they think, knock on 3 sets of 30 doors, you know, one in the town, one in the country, one in the middle. And you won't get any better focus group. Like, they will tell you straight, here's what we think about it. And you won't even have to ask them, because they'll bring it up themselves if it's something that's on their minds. So I actually really enjoyed doing it. I found it really useful. That was a funny story, I suppose. I was thinking about, back to my first election, it was 2009, in the local elections, which were pretty tough times for Fianna Fáil. We had the global financial crisis was roaring, and there were job losses hemorrhaging left, right and centre. And I had been selected as a candidate in summer 2008, when we had just hit an all-time high of 40-something%. Brian County had just taken over as Taoiseach. There was great hope and expectation. By the time the election, so I won this election convention, went into that, and by the time the election came, we were below 20%, and a disaster, and we were just hemorrhaging support all around. So it was a really tough campaign. But I remember, not actually, 2 friends of mine were supporting, two guys who were still involved locally here, 2000 Donegal actually, and they were down there. They live in Sanders now, both of them, and we split up the canvas into a few different areas. It was coming towards the last week, and they went out to a place called Cara, which is just a few miles out the road here from Sallins, and I was in Sallins with Carol Kelly, who's now councillor here, and we're at different teams. And the lads, anyway, the 2 Donegal lads went out to Cara, knocked on a new housing estate, said, look, we're here for Fianna Fáil, look, we're voting the local elections coming up next Friday, usual thing. And they were getting a pretty raw reception at every door. So times were tough election. I was like, right, okay, no, sorry lads, not this time. So they got, I think it started to rain as well, and it was getting towards the end of the night. It was getting towards about 20 to 9. They're like, well, we're kind of pretty much done. The estate was finished. There was one house up the end of a long lane, and they're like, you know what? It's 8:45 at this stage. James and Cameron back in Sallins, do we kind of just have back and meet up, or do we just do the last house? I said, we'll do the last house. There's one house left. You might as well keep going. We've gone this far. But up the lane to the house on its own in the field, and a woman answered the door, and she said, what's your business? And they told her their business. You better come in. It sounds serious. Brought them inside, and there was a man at the table, two elderly folk, man and woman, and he said, right, what's this about, lads? Fianna Fáil, will you work it out for you? Okay, you better make a good case for it. And they sat there and in their best Donegal brogue explained to this Kildare elderly household what they're about. And after about 15 minutes, the one house said, lads, do you know where you are? They were like, not really. And I said, do you know, like, this is Paddy Power's house? They're like, who's Paddy Power? I said, well, he's like a Fianna Fáil minister under Charlie Haughey. His son is Sean Power, local TD, and his grandson is Robbie Power, who's now a councillor. They're like, oh, no, he didn't know that at all. So they all had a great laugh. I think they broke out biscuits and might even broke out a bottle of whiskey. And they said, you're okay, lads, you're safe, you're home now, you're grand, come on into the fold. And this was a really nice story. And actually, just as a kind of little aside to that, that lady who I mentioned, who was actually, some people, certainly old members will know, Councillor Rob Power, good friend of mine, good councillor. It's actually his granny, and she actually passed away 2 weeks ago. And I told him that story, actually, just when she died. You know, it was one of my canvas memories was when my team went out to your grandparents' house, not knowing it was the biggest Fianna Fáil house in the county, you know, and tried to really hard to get a vote and realised it was a good way to finish the night. But I thought that was, you know, it was a nice end to it as well. That certainly they got the vote there. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I was ever shot at. I was threatened with a shotgun once. I don't think they actually shot at me. I kind of ran, didn't take any chances and ran away. Been bitten by dogs, all that kind of stuff in farmyards. But I've also had some amazing experiences. You know, sometimes if you're on a doorstep and you get talking to somebody and they tell you their whole kind of life story, and it can really move you, and they can tell you things that they've happened or difficulties they've had or that their children have had or that, you know, some belongings has had. And you can almost be lost in time and space. You're kind of suddenly there listening to that person and thinking, wow, this story is so poignant and I'm learning so much, and you're in that conversation and, you know, it's almost the world has stopped for a while. And that's happened. And sometimes you remember those conversations years later. You know, there are times that, you know, particularly when, you know, I suppose if you're successful and you kind of get involved in your TD and you're shaping policy and into all debates, you sometimes remember back to this kind of random conversation you had maybe 3, 4, 5 years previously. And you think, well, actually, you know, you could be passing a bill on pensions, and you remember that guy that stopped you on the street and said, you know, there's a problem with my pension because I worked in CIE and the way it was done, or, you know, whatever it is. And it sort of comes back to you. So I think no conversation is ever wasted. You learn a lot, but it's also often the people on the street will actually, they're the ones that are affected. So they'll actually pick up themselves if there's a gap or there's a problem. And sometimes as a legislator, you can bring them back to the table. You know, it might not be immediately, but it sticks with you, and you get a chance to fix that later on. So, and as I suppose, go back to the start, the first question: how do you get involved in politics? Go knock on some doors. If you like it, keep doing it, and you'll go far.
That's great, Jim. Thank you very much.
Okay.
finish off the interview, I just have a
Oh
few
yeah.
fire questions.
Okay.
Now, so the very first question I have is Barry's or Lion's tea?
Lions normally, but I did try Barry's during the lockdown out of desperation. It wasn't too bad.
Okay,
And actually, Punjana is really good as well.
lovely. So we're not quite sure if it's Barry's or Lion's.
Well, it's Lions normally, but I do like Punjana, but it's harder to get.
Okay. Favorite place in Ireland outside of Kildare?
I grew up in Wexford, so I kind of have a bias for there as well. Anywhere by the sea, though. I went to Achill for the last couple of summers on holiday. Achill Island, lovely. Anywhere by the sea. I know Kildare is inland, so to take Kildare out of it. Yeah, anywhere by the sea and the lakes. I love just going back to canvassing. I love canvassing up around kind of the Wicklow Kildare border. A couple of really great spots where you're kind of standing on top of you're still in Kildare, but you're looking out over Wicklow, looking out over Blessington Lakes, and really breathtaking scenery.
If you could pick anyone to play you in a movie, who would it be?
God. I don't know. I suppose I was going to Al Pacino as an amazing actor, but I don't know. I think he's probably a bit of an age gap there.
The politician you admire outside of Fianna Fáil?
Okay. I always like Gordon Brown, looking across the water. I always thought Gordon Brown, I kind of thought by the time he got his chance, the chance was gone. I actually liked the Blair Brown team in the early days. I thought they started really well, and I think it's actually a model for Fianna Fáil to look at in terms of centre-left, kind of social democratic, progressive party, but a party that also supports free enterprise, the advancement, the building up of an economy, a bigger state that reaches into all parts, but does it in a way that brings industry and economy with you. But I thought he got a kind of rough deal. Because by the time he took over, things had started to go wrong. Blair probably outstayed his welcome. Did good at the start, but moved on too quickly. I think Obama was an amazing president. Probably a lot of people say that, but I just think in our lifetime, he's probably the most standout politician that I can remember. His speeches, I remember when he was running for I actually remember reading about him in the winter before the primary started, before he kind of made it, and people were getting really excited about this guy. And I remember as his campaign got into difficulties, there was a couple of really kind of keynote speeches. There was a racial incident, and he was kind of obviously conflicted, because he was the first African-American president, but he couldn't be only defined by that. And like he just, at every time he was challenged, he just rose to the occasion magnificently and gave the most amazing, and inspired people. I read some books by his speechwriter, and the people that were around him, and just think, wow, and he did so much as well. And some things that he said were so obvious, but people didn't do them before. Talk to your enemies. Why do you go bombing them all the time? Why not get them to the table? At least try. Strengthen NATO. Strengthen the United Nations. Work more collaboratively internationally. Invest in foreign aid. All really good bread and butter things, and invest in education. And still like equality of opportunity. And yeah, look, I think that he did so much good.
Thank you. And your favorite film?
Favorite film. A couple of films I really like. I suppose go back to an old one, War Games. I don't know if people remember that. It was like an 80s film. I think Matthew Broderick was in it, but I watched it as a kid, all about a kid who's at home on his computer hacking into the Pentagon. He's starting World War III, and then artificial intelligence kicks in and kind of sorts it out. And I won't give away the ending for anyone that hasn't watched it, but it's an old movie, but it's a classic. Maybe because I'm kind of into computers and techie stuff and all that, and there's a bit of politics in it as well. I suppose the classics, Jaws is an old favorite of mine. I watched it again and again and again. It was one of the first films I ever saw in the cinema. Raiders of the Lost Ark was on the cinema as well, years and years ago. And yeah, there's a film called The Ghost in the Darkness, which I don't know if it would be as popular, but it's set in colonial Kenya. There's a couple of engineers out building a railway line, and they come across those difficulties, kind of planning local, but more importantly, there's a pretty big lion that wants to eat them. But there's a whole, it's kind of an adventure movie, but it's set in beautiful, kind of sprawling Kenya. And it's also kind of a good yarn about the empire and where things were at that time in terms of the kind of world as it was then. There's a couple.
And finally, your favorite joke?
Oh, oh dear. I might have said something unkind about other political parties, but we have to all be very nice to everybody now. So my favorite joke. Oh, I don't know. I'll have to think about that one more. You tell me one.
Oh God, I don't have any. Off the top of my head, put me on the spot. Well, that's all the questions I have. Thank you very, very much for taking part.
Not at all. Delighted to do it. Well done to all you're doing in Ógra through this time as well, because I've been watching your online presence, and I was involved in Ógra back in the day. I was involved on what we used to call the National Youth Committee, which I think is now you have a council. I think it's but same job. But yeah, well done. It's great to see you guys being so active, so active on social media, and even through the lockdown, you're keeping going, doing all these interviews, lots of interesting seminars and conversations. So keep it up. Well done, and delighted to be of hopefully of some interest and support today.
Thanks very much, James. That's great. Thanks everyone very much for watching. I will see you next time.